Let's learn about the Queen's Gambit, a classical way for white to play in the opening. Start by moving your queen's pawn to d4. If I reply with my queen's pawn to d5, then you can play the Queen's Gambit. Play your bishop's pawn to the square c4, immediately attacking my center. This is the starting position of the Queen's Gambit that we will analyze in this lesson. Your pawn on c4 is undefended. Let's see what happens if I capture it immediately. I have accepted the gambit by taking your pawn. There are several key ideas here, but first let me show you a fun trap. Move your pawn to the square e3. Now your bishop is prepared to capture the pawn on c4 in a single move. Undermine my pawn's defense by pushing your a-pawn forward to the square a4. My pawn chain is under attack. I will simply defend by advancing my a-pawn. It seems at first glance as if I have defended everything, but let's see what happens if you capture my pawn on the square b5. And I recapture. Do you see what is available for you to take now? Nice work. Okay, let's see what happens if I defend with my other pawn instead. This time, I will defend with my c-pawn instead. Play pawn takes pawn anyway to weaken my queen's side. This was the move I was anticipating, and I am prepared to capture back. My position is terribly weakened by so many pawn moves. Do you see how to exploit this? Take that move back and look for a subtle queen move that infiltrates along a diagonal. My position is terribly weakened by so many pawn moves. Do you see how to exploit this? There is no defense to this attack. I will lose too much material and may as well resign. Let's look at the Queen's Gambit accepted in a little more depth next. Here we are in the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. And I have accepted your gambit. Move your pawn to the square e3, freeing your bishop to capture my pawn back. If I try to hold on to that pawn, your rapid development will be more than adequate compensation for the lost pawn, so I will develop instead. The pawn is yours for the taking. Sorry, that wasn't the right move. Let's go back and look again. The pawn is yours for the taking. Because I spent 2 turns moving a pawn that is no longer on the board, it almost feels as if I am 2 moves behind. This is the value of a gambit. Develop your knight to the square f3 and prepare to castle. I will strike your center with my c-pawn. This is often black's best try for counterplay in the Queen's Gambit accepted. Your pawn on d4 is perfectly well defended, so go ahead and castle. In the Queen's Gambit accepted, you can often regain the lost pawn quickly and then develop your pieces and castle. Let's look at another variation next. What's the first move that you should play if you want to play the Queen's Gambit? Okay, I will also play my queen's pawn to the center. Your turn. Do you recall what move you should play now? Here we are in the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. What if I were to accept your gambit and take this pawn? Do you recall what move we looked at in this position? That's a solid choice. Whoever taught you this repertoire knew what they were doing. Okay, how should you continue? Nice work regaining your pawn. How should you continue? Before doing anything else, try to develop and castle in as few moves as possible. How should you continue? Excellent choice. What move should you play now? Nice work. You have a decent pawn center, a castled king, and a lead in development. What more could you ask for from an opening? I will often decline your gambit, choosing instead to reinforce my center. Develop your knight to the square c3. There are other moves you might play here, but this is my favorite way to play the Queen's Gambit. I will also develop a knight now to defend my center and prepare to castle. The Queen's Gambit declined is a vast jungle of variations. Let me show you a narrow path through the thicket. Play pawn takes pawn. I will capture back with my pawn, freeing my light-squared bishop to enter the game. Develop your bishop and pin my knight to my queen. This is an important idea that applies pressure to my position. I will develop and rid myself of this meddlesome pin. Reinforce your center by pushing your pawn forward to the square e3. I will also reinforce my center, but with my c-pawn. This pawn structure is so common it was given a name, the Carlsbad. Develop your bishop to the square d3. It's time for me to castle. Move your queen to the square c2, making a battery with your queen and bishop pointing at the square h7. Your last move created a threat. If I allow you to capture my knight with your bishop, then my pawn on h7 would fall next. I reinforce my knight, so that capturing it on f6 would invite its replacement into position. Develop your knight to e2. Placing your knight on the square e2 allows your f-pawn to move, which is an idea you can use to your advantage in this pawn structure. Now castle your king and complete your development. This is a strategically rich playground with many ideas for both colors. Let's look at just a few. One of the most common ideas for you is to expand in the center with your pawns. If I play my knight back to f8, then you can continue with this plan in the center by pushing your pawn to the square f3. You can see the value of moving your king's knight to the square e2 now. This plan would not be possible if your knight were on f3. Now expand in the center by thrusting your pawn forward to the square e4. This gives you an excellent position. Next, let's look at how I might prevent this idea. I know your plan is to expand in the center, so I am going to attack your bishop to slow you down. Retreat your bishop to safety. The battle for the square e4 is a long and strategic one. Exchange dark square bishops by capturing mine. This bishop exchange is common in the Queen's Gambit declined. This is an effective way for black to prevent the quick central expansion idea that we saw in the last example. Let's look at another attacking idea for you in this pawn structure, the minority attack. The plan is to advance your queenside pawns to break up my defenses. Slide your rook over to the square b1 to prepare to advance your pawns. Your pawns on a2 and b2 are outnumbered by mine on the queenside. This is why it is called a minority attack. Advance your b-pawn to the square b4. Supported by your rook, bishop and knight, your outnumbered pawns on the queenside pose a potent threat. Next, let's see if you remember what we have learned so far. Let's practice one of these plans to see if you recall the idea. In this position, I'm going to retreat my knight to the square f8. What plan should you carry out in this position? Expanding in the center is a strong idea. Excellent work recalling this plan. Let's test your memory on another idea that is very common in the Queen's Gambit declined. My pawn attacks your bishop. How should you respond? Nice move. Yes, this is best way to respond to my pawn move. My knight occupies an important central square. How should you reply to this? This move gives me a slightly better game after lots of exchanges. Consider a move that leaves the tension in the center instead. My knight occupies an important central square. How should you reply to this? Very good. Exchanging dark squared bishops is an important idea in the Queen's Gambit declined. Okay, let's get some practice with what you've learned. Let's start from the very beginning. If you want to play the Queen's Gambit, what move should you start with? That wasn't the move we looked at in this lesson. Start by pushing your queen's pawn forward to the square d4. Let's start from the very beginning. If you want to play the Queen's Gambit, what move should you start with? If I reply with my queen's pawn to d5, then you can play the Queen's Gambit. Your move. If I were to capture your pawn, this would be the Queen's Gambit accepted. I decided to decline your gambit. How should you develop your pieces? I will also develop a knight and attack the center. Do you remember the variation that I showed you here? There are many moves that are good here, but we reviewed ideas in the exchange variation. Start by capturing my pawn with yours. Do you remember the variation that I showed you here? Exchanging pawns in the center? Okay, I will recapture. And now? Very good. You're putting some pressure on me already. I have broken the pin on my knight by developing my bishop. Your move. There are many playable moves here, but that isn't the one that we reviewed in this lesson. Move your king's pawn to the square e3 so that your bishop can be developed. I have broken the pin on my knight by developing my bishop. Your move. Nice move. I will also reinforce my center with a pawn move. How should you continue? Excellent move. I've castled. What might you play here? Nice work remembering this subtle queen move. Your move. How should you continue? Excellent work developing your pieces. I'm impressed by your memory. Next, you can look forward to the Queen's Gambit Part 2 lesson. You may want to repeat this lesson on the Queen's Gambit, Marco. A chess player practices openings like a musician practices scales.